All right. Hi, my name's Chuck Fall, and you are at a Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement bi-monthly meetup. We're basically this is a group that Gloria Gilo founded. I'm co-founder. John Olson has been present. Tom, many of us have been involved in this Thursday evening meetup for at least a couple of years now. And I'm representing a Green Liberty Caucus. This is a ambition to have a voice within the Green, working within the Green Party, working outside the Green Party, to ultimately build a liberation coalition. Kind of the founding, foundational principles would be freedom, ecology, and justice. On a pragmatic level, Green Liberty is concerned with resisting and fighting corruption, especially the corruption of state crimes and other malfeasance from corporations and state. And on the pragmatic level, that means demanding accountability, transparency in government corporate affairs, and protection for whistleblowers. And unstated, but definitely present, is the need for a independent media to advance our resistance, our struggle, and our movement for liberation. And so our theme this evening is the question of appealing to United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and other founding, I suppose, documents and principles for the purpose of making a better society. I'll just say that Green Liberty Caucus, I personally am in the radical egalitarian camp. I accept the ideas advanced by John Spritzler, but I'm also I suppose you could say, a fence sitter, in that I realize that not everybody necessarily has an appetite or a willingness or a readiness to accept the more radical perspectives. And we can explore what those are and define those this evening. So, and I guess that's within the idea of a liberation coalition, building a Green Liberty bloc. That means ultimately advancing a united front and in my mind, that means a liberation from a plutocratic power structure, which is going apeshit crazy. Some people reference them as psychopathic, sociopathic, whatever word you like to use to describe is up to you. But this is a very real problem that we're facing today. So this is about what arguments, what appeals can we make, ought we make, and how should we make those? So the program is Emanuel's going to present. He has thoughts on this topic. John Spritzler has thoughts well articulated, and he has posted on his Substack. Both Emanuel and John have Substacks, and you can find their work there. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you, Emanuel, and I think what that means is you're going to get the primary camera view here. So go ahead and share with us. And let me just be clear, is there any other introductory remark that should have been made that I didn't make? Okay. So
this is perfect.
Okay, you're on, Emanuel.
All right. Well, thank you, Chuck, for hosting this very important discussion. The origin of this discussion was an exchange that I had with John Spritzler over a period of time about the Constitution and its relevance for our current struggle. And it extends beyond that to the Declaration of Independence, to the Bill of Rights in the specific, and also other things, the Articles of Confederation, even the Great Law of the Cherokee, of the Iroquois tribe, the foundational text. So we wanted to, both John and I, make this a broader discussion and invite other people to give their perspectives. So I'll first say that the problem of how to reinterpret a great tradition for a new age and new conditions is a complex one. And it's always been a problem throughout history. In Europe, there was an enormous debate about how and whether to adopt aspects of Greek and Roman philosophy and statecraft, which came from cultures, for example, Greece and Rome, which never questioned slavery. And this was a real problem, and it demanded real creativity. In some ways, John Milton's work, Paradise Lost, was this attempt to try and mediate, to bring together the Christian and the Roman Greek traditions, and to some degrees was not totally successful. In the specific issue of the Constitution, I guess the fundamental debate was that in the 1850s between William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass on the Constitution. William Lloyd Garrison took the position that the Constitution was innately flawed, that it was the source of slavery, and that it supported a hierarchy, a hidden hierarchy, which was the cause of the terrible suffering in the United States. Frederick Douglass, in public, took the position that the Constitution, if you read it for what it says, and you ignore or you don't focus on what its authors actually practiced, that it does provide the foundations for a free society in a powerful way. In one of his speeches, Frederick Douglass said that he had learned the most about freedom from Thomas Jefferson. Now, this was obviously a very ironic statement, but I think we can understand Frederick Douglass's point that he was born into slavery, he'd suffered from it, and he'd seen the terrible crimes of slavery, but that Thomas Jefferson, an indulgent, selfish man who was part of the slaves owning class and who failed to keep his promises concerning his the people he treated as slaves. He still wrote some of the most effective and moving texts about the issue of freedom. So, in a sense, the issue for us then and now is about, are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater? If we say that the founders, those who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, which are different texts, and there's, of course, an intermediate text, the Articles of Confederation, if we throw them out, are we not losing something? And especially because so many of our citizens understand something about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but many of the things that we might advocate are outside of the range of what they're used to using as a terminology for talking about equality and the rule of law and a just society. So I personally am not opposed to writing a new constitution, to shifting the centers of power in the United States or in other countries, and to creating a more decentralized, self-sustaining, local community-based system in the United States, in the Americas, and globally. And I certainly welcome such a discussion, and I would love for Green Liberty to move forward, maybe even towards a constitutional convention to propose what a constitution could be for the United States. However, at the same time, I feel that these documents, the Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, but others, have tremendous value in giving a sense of direction for where we can go and giving us authority in the tradition, which can be used to challenge those who seek to create a complete plutocracy. The Declaration of Independence is even more powerful, and I've cited it repeatedly, especially with its statement that the citizens have a right and a responsibility to overthrow any government that ceases to function as a government representing the people. The Articles of Confederation have valuable aspects, content, common sense, and other writings, Federalist Papers, etc., have, I think, incredible value. I personally prefer Thomas Paine, but I think there's much we can learn from that tradition. And even beyond that, the great law of the Iroquois nation, which was one of the inspirations for the Constitution, and for that matter, aspects of Chinese Confucian ideas of creating a state which was not run by an aristocracy and not run by the church, which were discussed in France in the 17th century and inspired Benjamin Franklin and others, that these aspects as well are worth us considering. But it's certainly not my position to say that the Constitution is great, that we should accept it as it is. But I think that there's much of value in that. And I guess I would want to say that we need to discuss how we can solve this baby bathwater problem. How can we pull out those aspects or those elements within the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which are helpful to us at this period, at this point, and creatively and proactively and constructively rewrite, take out. We have to say some parts of that tradition are not appropriate to the current moment, and they were not even appropriate at the time, and they reflected certain innate problems in those who drafted in terms of their mentality and their position. And I guess I would say in closing that I certainly can easily anticipate that I would be judged harshly myself by future generations who see me in a particular historical context, maybe one beyond what I'm capable of conceiving of, since I don't know where green liberty or the United States or other things will go in the future. And so a certain degree of humility on our part is also called for by history. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuel. So good, you got the ball rolling on this conversation. The spotlight is going to go on John Spritzler, and hold on to your hats, folks. John is going to lay it. And I'm teasing.
Chuck,
but
can you
John,
hear?
you are our radical egalitarian, and I'm going to put the spotlight on you, John, and tell us, you've written an essay. It's at your Substack. You could put it in the chat. People can take it home with them. Where are you at on this topic? And give us some background on yourself as an egalitarian, and
Okay,
and then share your thoughts.
just give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, I just posted my essay.
Okay.
So Chuck, you a day or so ago, in response to my Substack article on this question, you said I was an iconoclast. So I suppose it's true that I am. I think some icons need clasting. So here we go.
Yes.
I'm going to read from my essay, but before I do, I just would like to say, in response to what Emanuel just said, we're trying to create a different kind of world, which I call an egalitarian world, without class inequality, without oppression. And to do that, we need to build a mass movement that has a clear understanding of what the goal is, because the ruling class is very skillful in making sure that if you don't know what your goal is, you won't get it. You'll be offered something that sounds sort of close, maybe like what you want, but it isn't really. And that's been the demise of many, many movements that wanted to abolish oppression and class inequality, but they didn't say so explicitly. So the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa just said it was against apartheid. And what they got stuck with is a continuation of horrible class inequality, which is arguably more oppressive now than during the days of apartheid. And the civil rights movement, what the vast majority of people in that movement wanted was an end to oppression, an end to class inequality. But they didn't say that that was their goal. They said they wanted to abolish the Jim Crow laws, which is like abolishing apartheid. It's a good goal, but they won that goal. The anti-apartheid movement won its goal. But the moral of the lesson is that you can win what you explicitly aim for, but you don't win any more than that. And as a result, there's still horrible oppression of Black people. That's called the new Jim Crow, of prison incarceration. And I could list more and more examples. People wanted an 8-hour day. They wanted unions to be legal. Yeah, they said that explicitly, and they won the goal, the mass movements. But they're still suffering because they didn't eliminate what they really wanted to eliminate, which was class inequality and oppression. So what I think we need to do to build a movement that wins what we really want is we need to speak clearly about what we are for and not try to gain support for it or legitimacy for it by relying on the authority of documents that say the opposite. That's a pretty simple concept. It's the one I advocate. So now I would like I'll read from what I wrote in the document I posted on the chat.
Perfect.
I do not cite or honor the U.S. Constitution to validate my egalitarian revolutionary aspiration, and here's why. The reason is that the U.S. Constitution is a bad document because it wrongly says that the form of government it describes is legitimate, when in fact it is not. The two main reasons the U.S. government, as described in the Constitution, is not legitimate are: one, it wrongly allows anti-egalitarians, in other words, people who advocate for class inequality and oppression of the have-nots by the haves, to partake in the government. This makes it possible for an oppressive class of people to gain control of the government and use it to dominate the entire population, as has obviously already happened today in the United States. Number two, the Constitution wrongly says that a few hundred people, members of Congress, the 9 Supreme Court justices, and the president, have the legitimate authority to write and enforce laws that all of the current 330 million residents of the United States must obey. This makes it possible, as has obviously happened already, for a rich, oppressive class to control the entire population merely by gaining control with bribes or threats of a few hundred people. In truth, the only people who have a legitimate right to write and enforce the laws that everybody in a local community must obey are the people constituting as equals the sovereign, meaning no higher governmental power, local assembly of egalitarians, membership in which is the right of all and only of adults, A, who live or work in the local community, and B, who are presumed, unless there is evidence to the contrary, to hold egalitarian values, i.e., opposition to class inequality, being for no rich and no poor equality, mutual aid, fairness, and truth, and C, who agree that egalitarians have the right to write and enforce laws that all in the local community must obey. This is what makes a government legitimate. It also, in stark contrast to the U.S. Constitution, makes it very difficult for a rich, oppressive class to get control of the government. The U.S. Constitution thus describes a government that is perfectly suited to the needs of a rich upper class that oppresses the great majority of people. And of course, a rich upper class today does exactly that and has done so since the days of the founding fathers. In fact, they gathered together to write the U.S. Constitution largely because they were frightened to death of the just recent Shays' Rebellion, an uprising of the farmers in Massachusetts who took seriously the rhetoric of equality and democracy that George Washington used to get them to enlist in his Revolutionary Army against King George, but discovered that it was just rhetoric and that they were being horribly oppressed by these founding fathers. And they almost overthrew them in Massachusetts, which is why the founding fathers needed to dump the Articles of Confederation to create the U.S. Constitution, which created a much more powerful centralized federal government, which in fact George Washington, in just a few years later, as president, had to use the federal army now instead of a private army he had to raise against Shays' Rebellion. He now had a federal army, which he used to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion. Likewise, farmers, have-nots in the western part of Pennsylvania and that area, who rose up against a horrible unjust tax that the founding fathers were imposing on them. Well, this is how they used the Constitution, even as far back as the founding fathers. So yes, I know that one can elicit nodding heads of approval from Americans for one's views if one says those views are consistent with or implied by the U.S. Constitution. The reason for this is that Americans have been taught to essentially worship the U.S. Constitution the way people worship holy scriptures, such as the Bible or the Quran. It's thus easy to gain some support for, or at least get a polite consideration of, one's views by attaching one's views somehow to what people think is holy, which includes, in the United States, the U.S. Constitution. The important fact, however, is that in order for the egalitarian revolutionary movement to succeed, it will be necessary for the vast majority of people to know exactly what it aims for, exactly what kind of society, based on what principles. People must especially know what makes government legitimate. The rich will use even the slightest bit of confusion in the minds of people about these things to get away with keeping the system of class oppression intact. Therefore, because it is currently widely accepted, for lack of any real serious thought or critical discussion about it, I might add, in the United States, that what the U.S. Constitution describes is indeed a legitimate form of government, an egalitarian revolutionary movement must, absolutely must, create a massive public discussion about why the U.S. Constitution is flat out and dangerously wrong. It is obviously not possible to talk about why the U.S. Constitution is flat out and dangerously wrong, while at the same time citing it as an authority and honoring it in any way. Now, let me just remind people, the Bolshevik Party in Russia made a revolution with rhetoric about how it was going to be real freedom and democracy, how it was for all power to the Soviets, which were essentially the local assemblies of egalitarians that I talk about. And then when they got in power, they crushed those Soviets, and they told people that they had to obey the central government, which was controlled by the Bolsheviks. And people, for the most part, not entirely, there was resistance, which is very important to know about, but for the most part, people felt that they really did have to obey the new central Russian government. Why? Because, like Americans and like many people around the world, but not all, that's important, there are exceptions, but like most people, they were trained to think that, you have to obey the central national government. And so they did. And it was extremely oppressive for that. And we need to build a movement that tells people no. The real legitimate government is the local assembly of egalitarians, which you and the other people who are against class equality and against oppression all have an equal right to participate in as equals, and only such a body can make the laws that you are morally required to obey. And that means we have to tell people that the whole idea of electing representatives and sending them to Washington, D.C., and then thinking, well, we have to obey them because they're the legitimate government is false. And we can't make our message clear if we say, oh, we're just trying to implement the US Constitution or honor it or carry it out, or any words to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So now my turn, and I guess I'm the fence sitter here. And because I am in John Spritzler's camp. Philosophically, just however you want to think about it. But I'm also characterized myself as a fence sitter, and I have some rough remarks, and here's my thinking, and then we're going to open this up and talk about this, because I agree with Emanuel, and we have to talk about this, and we have to get really clear, because and I accept that I'm working on false principles or whatever. So let me just see what have I prepared. I've got some thoughts here, and I just want to say that okay, so let me just go through my notes here. I say yes to arguing for an egalitarian society. Well, I say from constitutional documents, but in fact, I'm not sure that the Constitution advances necessarily the egalitarian principles. And that might be something we loop back around and really kind of examine closely. And I'll say that green liberty is in solidarity with the radical egalitarian aspiration, but the aim is to work toward the goal by way of advancing a liberation coalition. That means accommodating ideas, less radical perspectives. Can a society be egalitarian, but the rich have not been fully removed from power, but only reduced in power? I think so. But we only need, because we can look to countries that we could characterize as social democracies like Finland, where there is more fairness and egalitarian structures in place. But they still have a rich ruling class, and they're still participating in all the machinations of war. So we're working with the problem of getting from where we are now to where we want to go in the future. And where we are now is a society that's, I'm convinced, I accept the evidence that we're tending toward a techno-totalitarianism. And this is subscribing to the theories of David Hughes and his group. He's dialed in with Catherine Austin Fitts, who comes from a kind of a right-wing classical libertarian theories. And what I grapple with is that Catherine Austin Fitts explicitly says we need to devolve power. into decentralized systems. And many people who, align with constitutional theories and so on, accept that the Constitution has been profoundly corrupted. And again, I'm going back to John's point, that maybe in fact that that's a false notion that the Constitution necessarily is structured for an authentic free society. But in which case we do need to reinvent ourselves. So we are tending toward a place of techno-totalitarianism with the advent of AI, digital systems, the construction of these vast server farms, and so on. So I'm operating from a theory of a transitional project that, and I accept John's notion that we should be aspirational and ambitious and explicit around the end game. But getting from here to there conceivably means transitional projects. And I think it's in the theory of that transitional project that I'm inclined to say, let's seize on things in the Constitution, things in our Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the beautiful notion of the Iroquois Confederation is absolutely something that we should not throw out, because in the end, an egalitarian society will necessarily be one of a confederal system of free cities and free people in their cities and in their places, in their counties, and so on. So so this idea of picking the low-hanging fruit shows up in the examples of, if we're oppressed by the banking cartels, and then if we liberate from the banking cartels by democratizing our money supply, for which the Constitution has a provision, then conceivably in our transition from here to there, we liberate by democratically taking control. Now, this means there's a problem here of engaging in government, having people in government accepting this idea. And I'll just offer that part of our project is conceivably recruiting from the existing ranks of the elected and persuading them to abandon their fealty to the plutocratic power structure. And I think, John, you've talked about this in your notions of a liberation movement, that we need to appeal to the police forces, the military forces, to adopt this egalitarian vision. But in the meantime, as we work toward that, it's conceivable to me that we would have we would use the electoral system to advance the egalitarians, to run on egalitarian principles, to use those races for the bully pulpit to say, we're dominated by a banking cartel and we can liberate from them if we use our constitutional right as a people to issue our own currency. And there's a whole long tradition around this, a lot of discussion on it. Abraham Lincoln famously, allegedly, was assassinated because he was advancing the greenback. And even Kennedy was allegedly assassinated because he was diverging from the economic kind of program of the elites. There's another bit of appeal to the Constitution that I think in our early documents is the principle that we, the people, have the right to withdraw our consent to be governed. And this is, I think, one that that an egalitarian should in due conscience feel good about asserting, even though these ideas come from whatever, the bourgeois elements of England and so on, and France. But this principle that we have the right, we the people are entitled to withdraw our consent and recreate the government of we the people is, I think, something egalitarians should not, should embrace and draw on. Then there's as Emanuel alluded to, the Bill of Rights, constitutional provisions. Remember, the Bill of Rights was inserted because I guess the more libertarian elements of the states weren't going to go along with the central planning authority of the Constitution. They insisted, and they said, okay, we'll give them to you. And they got a Bill of Rights. And there's all kinds of argument that can be made from the Bill of Rights. Certainly, we in our movement are at risk. John has asked me, when did you become a terrorist, Chuck? Because I speak to our First Amendment principles of our right to speak, to assemble, to protest, to petition for redress for our grievances. And our grievances are great, huge grievances, especially when we lay out all the state crimes. And this is what Green Liberty does, is we're building a movement on the predicate that we've been lied to. And our history has been stolen by a deep state plutocratic structure. And I'll close with this. There's a fourth section of the Constitution, which is called the Guarantee Clause. And it's an intriguing notion that the purpose of the Constitution, the creation of our central authority in the federal government, was that the federal government would guarantee to the states that they would be protected from foreign and domestic violence. Well, arguably, the COVID event, the 9/11 event, the assassination of our president, all rise to treasonous acts, especially when they're understood to have come from within the government itself. Now, this is a bit of a conundrum for states who are confronted with the reality that the very entity that's supposed to be protecting them is, in fact, deploying violence against them. And that's my view on the COVID event. And it was an event deployed out of the Department of Defense as a fake natural event, public health and so on. We don't have to go unpack that tonight. But our plutocracy has absolutely failed to protect us from the toxins. They have not been honorable. They have not been responsible. And so all kinds of argument can be made on why we need to essentially liberate from this plutocracy that has been profoundly irresponsible. So I can see reasons to argue from constitutional principles, but I'm also accepting John Spritzler's point that if we don't get clear on our end goal, and he has stories about people in a movement working together, and only to have your ally turn into your enemy. And this is a very serious issue, and there's some profound history to support that concern. So we have hands up. Let's go to John Olson and then Emanuel.
Okay, good. Well, I appreciate this. Very good, good positions. I respect everybody's views here, as well thought out, and kind of like at a buffet, some of this, some of that. I kind of identify with Thomas Paine myself. He's somebody that I'm not an organizer. I'm not somebody that would write a constitution. I'm more of a big picture conceptualizer. At least that's what I think of myself to doing. There's a book here that has a good deal of reference to, well, it's about Thomas Jefferson. Here's the book here called American Sphinx by this fellow, Joseph Ellis, a very comprehensive biography. And he goes into the issue in depth about the conundrum that Jefferson faced on slavery, recognizing it morally as in direct contradiction to the words of the Declaration, but also that in order to maintain a new country in the face of the aggression that they faced with England and potentially other European empires, that they needed to have some unity, and they couldn't have unity in the South unless they adapted to slavery. In other words, not to, at this point to make it the central issue or a divisive issue, but recognizing that eventually there would have to be a resolution. I mean, it goes into that at some depth. What I'm concerned about, and here I'm also speaking for the colleagues here in the resistance movement in Maine, we're very concerned that if there's a constitutional convention, which is being pressed now through the various states, and they're close to having enough to do it, is that we would lose not only the bathwater, but the baby as well. There's a great deal in the Constitution that is sound, particularly the amendments. I mean, this is the way it was adapted, and the Bill of Rights. We wouldn't want to lose any of that. So I'm with Emanuel on that. On the other hand, in the long run, I do want to have an egalitarian society. I've been a socialist revolutionary from, at least in principle for the last 50 years or so. There's also the question of the national issues versus local. Things like dealing with the chemtrails. You can't deal with that or nuclear waste and factory pollution simply by having a local town meeting or even a statewide meeting. These things are national. And then, of course, there's the issue of war and peace. So there's but I like the idea of subsidiarity, where you deal with everything you possibly can locally. Then you go to maybe a county, or then you go to the state, and then you go national. So there's a lot of rework that needs to be done. We all agree that the existing system is rotten to the core. I think none of us here would have any problem with that. Particularly that now that we have these plethora of executive orders, where's the constitutional validity of that? There may be some procedural small things that there's no problem, but when policies are declared by a president over and over, no matter who it is in the office, that's a problem. And similarly with having wars without the congressional authorization. I mean, that's flagrantly been violated ever since World War II. Let's see here. So I think the founding fathers had made what we would now regard as an optimistic and maybe naive assumption that in general, those who are elected would at least act honorably, even if they had differences of opinion. I think that was their foundation. Their assumption was that there would be at least honor. And that, of course, has been utterly thrown under the bus. And so we're also dealing with the issue of the form of government versus the content of government. And it's not as much the form, which is, at the time, it was truly radical. It was breaking with the monarchies. And it was creating, the people are creating our own government. Of course, it was the rich white old men. That's who it was. Well, not old, not all of them were old, but they were rich white men only. And since then, there have been amendments to make some of those corrections along the way. But above all, it's the content of government that's rotten to the core in every which way. And we're agreed on that. One final thing. I've been in favor of breaking up the empire by way of peaceful secession, by way of withdrawing consent. Have regional, smaller countries. And when this raises the question of nationalism, which is often thought as inherently negative because it's associated with the major powers, particularly the Axis powers in World War II. In nationalism, that's a bad. But when you think of it as defensive nationalism, for example, the small island countries of the Pacific. When you think of Burkina Faso right now, fighting the imperials, particularly the French, and this marvelous new leader, Traoré, who I've been reading and watching. And he reminds me so much of Malcolm X and Fred Hampton and Paul Robeson and Che Guevara. He's a marvelous guy, and hopefully he'll be able to survive. He's getting some real help. He just was in Moscow for the recent meeting on the anti-Nazi celebration. So I'm basically in favor of having us seriously consider supporting secession, and have been to two conventions between 2000 and 2010, one in New Hampshire, one in Vermont, was seriously considering secession. So anyway, I'll put that on the table, and I will release my commentaries for the world. Go for it.
Thank you, John. So John Spritzler, you have your hand up. Do you want to interject, or should we go to the other people with their hands up? Can you hold that thought, John Spritzler?
Sure.
Okay, make a note of it. And so the lineup is Emanuel, Denise, Mike from Florida, Mark Rolifson. We're going to come back to John Spritzler. And I'll just observe that John Olson just added a whole nother topic of secession, which is a whole nother conversation from, arguing about using the Constitution and these founding documents or not. Another can of worms, but it's out on the table now. Thank you, John Olson. Emanuel, go ahead, and then Denise.
Right. Well, I wanted to just respond to John's comments briefly, and then I'll let everybody else continue. First, obviously, I'm sympathetic with much of what John says, but I think we have to be pragmatic about where we are and about human nature. Humans are very flawed. We're not run by angels, and egalitarian societies have not, since the Neolithic period, have not been very successful. They've been short-lived, and we have to think about why that is. So in the case of forming communities run by egalitarians, it's easy for powerful people to infiltrate those, set their own standards for what an egalitarian is and is not, execute those who are not egalitarians, and form their own fascistic, totalitarian local governments. That has to be countered in its own way, which includes counterintelligence and organized efforts to keep people from taking over government. This is a reality of humans. And it comes back to that old phrase, and I hate to pull it out, which is when someone says, you want to change the world, they say, yeah, you and what army? Which, and not to say you need an army per se, but you have to be organized in a complex national and international way. And I would throw out in closing the greatest threat that we face right now, which is the implementation of tens of thousands of low orbit satellites through Starlink, StarGuard, and other classified programs, which are meant to track everybody 24 hours, 24/7, and are linked to drones, robots, and some of them may be able to actually hit you with electromagnetic radiation directly. This is the greatest threat we face, and local communities gathering together to talk about egalitarianism have no chance of taking down this sort of organized effort to oppress the entire world using technology. So I'm not saying that I know the solution. We're going to have to work on this. But I personally feel, and I say this not as part of some ideology, but as a personal, after years of contemplating this, that if we're not organized in a sophisticated manner, that we're not going to be able to defeat this sort of an organized assault on us. As Martin Luther King and others before him said, if you want to fight those advocating war, you have to be at least as brave and at least as well organized as they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuel. So John Spritzler, can you wait, or because we have hands up that went up before you, or do you want,
One quick point.
yeah, go for it.
I am now reading from Nature, Nature magazine, the prestigious scientific journal.
Yep.
The article, the title is "Who Built Europe's First Cities? Clues about the Urban Revolution Emerge." Around 6,000 years ago, a group known as the Kukuteni Tripilla culture developed egalitarian settlements north of the Black Sea and created the region's earliest urban centers. Then, after 2 millennia, they vanished. So I report this to point out that what Emanuel said about egalitarian societies not lasting very long is apparently not true. And there are other very long-lasting egalitarian societies that we can read about that the ruling class does not want us to know about. So I have many more things to say, but for
Okay.
later.
But make a note of your other thoughts, John. I know you have a lot of things to say, and I appreciate that you've basically asserted that there is a history of egalitarian societies. And that's what John is emphasizing, even though, and I think I agree with him that we don't learn about this in high school. We don't learn about this in human history. We don't learn about these projects. Let's go to Denise, Mike, and then Mark.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for holding this talk, Chuck and Emanuel. And thank you, all of you. It's great to have this conversation. I just want to say, Emanuel and John Spritzler are good examples of egalitarian. I'm a radical egalitarian. I'll probably curl a few people's hair, but we have to think of things of ourselves in a completely different fashion. I know there's been a lot of talk about constitution. Now, I think that the constitution, the idea of a constitution has failed us. The idea of government has failed us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this position right now. And we need to have a different way of thinking, and that is an egalitarian way of thinking. So and that it's difficult for me to explain it because I haven't really seen it. It's just all, theoretical. But we need to see it, and we need to see examples of it. And I don't think we should worry about a big movement, because how things really happen is by talking to each other and having new systems that we can engage in. The basic element of egalitarianism is free speech. We do not know how to work with free speech. We do not know how to do it. I have my ideas, but I tend to offend people, but I don't want to do that. But it's just, even in our talking styles, we don't know how to interact with each other on an egalitarian, peer-to-peer way. We've always got a status. We've always got somebody who's got more status than us, which it all goes back to so much like the ownership of land, the ownership of people. And this is embedded in our mindset. But if I do understand that we do need a constitution, we might have, it's a good idea to have what we believe, right? And a constitution, though, is a failure unless it has some sort of dynamic element in it. It's got to change with the changing of the mindset. It is ridiculous, in my view, to go by something that was 300 years old, 200 years old, or 100 years old, because they didn't have any of the conditions that we have today. Like, they don't have to worry about electromagnetic radiation. They didn't have to worry about advertising, television, children being brought up, with mixed genders and radiation, like nuclear radiation and all that. They didn't have those things on their agenda. They had different things. And information those times traveled at very small, like, slow rate. Whereas now we can exchange information instantly. And now we have got the tools today to be egalitarian very quickly. But you know, we're stuck in the past. I personally think that we need to forget about the past. Look, nobody had a say in it. And that's not how egalitarianism should work. Everybody should be able to have a say in it. I just want to inform you that I have designed a system for egalitarianism. It's for egalitarianism. It is the most comprehensive egalitarian method possible. You can't get more egalitarian than everybody having the say when they want to, everybody having the ability to make a proposal when they want to. It's one thing, and then everybody having the ability to challenge the proposal. It's all written out on my Substack. But it is not enough to have just the village. You know, it's really not enough. We live in a very integrated world now. But I do think we do need to have the levels of electorates, you know, and we need to make the electorates equal in number. So that really means equal say. What we've got right now with the electorates, it's the dog's breakfast. Like, they've all got different numbers of people in them. That doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. Plus, voting on a person has absolutely no meaning. That's why we're allowed to do it, you know. So what we have to do is we have to start small and have lots of pockets of small starters, because if you're small, they don't really worry about you. But if we have a lot of people, multitudes of small pockets, then what happens is we slowly change the mindset. I don't worry about people who do not understand what's happening, people who don't know chemtrails are being sprayed on them, people who don't know that vaccines are bioweapons and all that sort of stuff, because those people are there for a reason. They're not going to know. They don't want to know. They just want to go on with the status quo. They are here to protect status quo. There's an element of society in our genetic makeup or whatever it is that is like that. It's a very big element of society. But when they see change, they will, and a lot of people are doing it, or a fair few, then they will go along with it. So I see a lot of people working with the outskirts of all these people who they're not going to listen. They'll listen, and then we need to have different systems so that then we can actually do the things that we desire without having to explain it to superiors or anything like that. Just let me have a quick look that see, even the idea of rights, even that is kind of like a fallacy, because we are free, okay? That is the way we are. But then somebody came along and told us that, no, we're not free, that we have to go by what other people say. And we all need to be able to say what we agree to and find the people that agree with us, and we implement those things. Not everybody, like what we have now is an illusion where everybody gets the vaccine, everybody votes, everybody does the same thing, everybody has the same holidays. It's not really like that. So I'll leave it at that because I don't want to overwhelm you. But if you want to know how, if you want to picture it, I've done a lot of work on this, and I'm happy to discuss anything with you.
So Denise,
Yes.
thank you. Put your Substack in the chat, please, so
Sure.
people can find you and your work. And again, hands are going up. Let's be mindful of a 2-3 minute window. Let's kind of make our point. And I need to go back and kind of review what you've just said, Denise. You put a lot out there. And I think what we need to be mindful of is, it is amazing how everybody has a unique perspective on what we need to do. You know, so we need to find our points of agreement and really start building on those. And that's what we're trying to do tonight in our conversation, for sure. Let's go to Mike from Florida, and then Mark, Judith, and we'll come back to John Spritzler. Mike, what are your thoughts? Mike is my friend from Truth Action Project. He's a constitutionalist. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm actually driving right now, and I wish I could have wrote down all my thoughts and issues, but I will try to recall them the best I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting presentation. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I have not heard anything I disagree with, really, with the exception of the constitutional convention idea. That is something we definitely don't want to do. It's too dangerous right now. And I, at one time, was an advocate, but have reversed my position. But anyways, the merits of egalitarianism are stupendous. It is without saying. The idea, the policy, the philosophy is awesome. It's excellent. It's it's spectacular. But here's my position. The problem is not the money, it's the love of the money and what it does to the people that pursue it. That's the real core root of the problem. And we don't have the system is not broke. The system has a lock on it. The elites are inside the system and we are outside the system, locked out. The system is like a machine. They are operating this machine that we're locked out of. We don't have the key. We don't have access to the key, nor do we have access to any of the controls of this machine. We just ride and watch and observe and get abused, while those who have the keys control it and operate it and benefit from it. So the system of the machine is not broke. The machine is working quite well for those who are abusing it. The problem with we the people is our representation. Our representation was captured in 1910 when they reformulated the proportional method of constituents per representative. During the convention of 1787, Washington was the MC. As the master of ceremonies, he only spoke once regarding an issue, and that was the formula for proportional representation. There was a consensus somewhat that it was to be 40,000 per representative, but Washington disagreed. He said, no, we want 30,000. We want fewer people per constituent so that the voice of those 30,000 can be understood and honored by the representative. When you have too many, that makes honoring the voice and demands of your constituents much more difficult. And at that time, 10,000 per district was a huge amount. Now we have minimum of 700,000 per representative and up to over 1 million per representative. And it's impossible for any representative to honestly represent 700,000 people. So it is my position that the system's not broke. It's the method of representation that is broken. We have been denied representation by a systematic conspiracy to defraud the people by lowering the volume of their voice by increasing the number of constituents per representative. And so I think we need to decentralize. We need, I have a website called countycongress.com, And the philosophy of a county Congress is what the original founders intended. They wanted the counties to be the districts of representation, not a gerrymandered perversion. And that's just another example of how our representation was stolen from us through gerrymandering. And we need to eliminate parties and unify around principles and policy, not parties. Parties are the poison in our system, and it's a divider and it's a destroyer. And we need to be unified around policy and principles. I yield.
Thank you, Mike. Maybe Tom Rodman can put what's your web address, Mike, for your site, countycongress.org?
No, .com.
No, .com. Maybe Tom could post that into the chat for you. You're driving. Thank you, Mike. Mark Rollison, Judith. We're going to loop back to John Spritzler.
Hi, I got here a few minutes late, so I don't know if anybody read the preamble to the Constitution, because I think it's kind of important to read it. Just short. It's, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Well, I don't see anything in the Constitution that prohibits an egalitarian society or prohibits a socialist or communist society or advocates for a capitalist society, or for that matter, there's nothing in the Constitution that mentions political parties or corporations. The problem is not the Constitution. The Constitution is actually a solid document. It's the leadership of this country that is in violation of the Constitution in many ways, whether it's the Patriot Act, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, or whether it's, media or social media censorship being directed by the government, which is a violation of the First Amendment. And so I think, there's a lot of things the Constitution didn't think about. And my understanding is back at the founding of this country, corporations were not allowed to participate in elections. And money in politics is probably the big one that has corrupted the whole system, but it's never mentioned in the Constitution. And that is certainly an issue. We should move to public campaign finance to get rid of money in politics, or how you do that. But I don't think that throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, is really is going to solve anything. I think the First Amendment is something that is very important to all of us. And a lot of countries around the world don't have a First Amendment, like Germany, where they can arrest you for spreading Russian propaganda if you don't go along with the NATO narrative about Ukraine. So I think this whole argument about, well, the Constitution is the problem here, we don't need a Constitution to form an egalitarian society, it's getting in the way, is a bogus argument. I think it's being able to hold our leadership to account. And really, when you look at a revolutionary document, the real revolutionary document is a Declaration of Independence. And what people need to be reminded, especially on the 4th of July, is that the government governs on the consent of the governed, and the governed has the right to either alter that government or replace it if it's no longer acting in good faith. And this is where it becomes difficult: is how do you replace the government without an armed rebellion? And that is, to me, the crux is how would you overthrow this government? So I'll leave it at that.
That's a good point to loop back to. How do we take power from, if we're going to be a free and egalitarian people? And maybe that's something we explore further. John Spritzler certainly has thoughts on that. So let's go to Judith, and we'll loop back to Mike in Florida, and then John and Judy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Noel, I just wanted to ask John Spritzler about the Kukatani Tripelia culture. What are the indices that they use to determine egalitarianism in that society?
The article is behind a paywall and I didn't pay.
Then you can't be sure that what they call egalitarian is really lives up to the name.
Yeah,
Well,
I only know what I read, and they called it egalitarian. So
All right,
presumably they had some basis for that. They're not stupid
Well-
people.
Well,
But-
all these magazines have been discredited since COVID. You realize, so I don't take them at their word. I don't
They're-
take anyone. Even if they
Judy,
weren't
Judy, that's
discredited, I
not the
wouldn't
only
take them at
example.
their word.
That's not the only example. There was an egalitarian society described in
Okay.
some more detail by David Graeber in his wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything, that existed for several hundreds of years in the same place, but before the Aztec civilization developed in Mexico. And then there was the egalitarian society called Palmares in 17th century Brazil that lasted at least 99 years. So
And
in
what
other
were the
words,
indices? What were the indices
you
of
can
this?
you can read my articles on my website about it. You know, we're talking about
All right, but
society.
all
Listen,
right,
just a
but
second.
we're talking
about
Go ahead, John.
we're
I
talking
think you do.
about societies
Well, I
that
want a
left
direct answer from.
crying out loud. I can't say a word.
Judy, let John answer. Judy is asking.
No, I just
Judy
want
had the
to.
floor originally.
Judy,
I just want
We are-
to tell him that I want a direct answer from him, not direct me to his article.
okay.
We are
Thank you, Judy.
talking about societies that existed thousands or many hundreds of years ago, which left traces that archaeologists interpret. They did not leave.
Yes, I know that. I know that.
They did not leave detailed discussions of the
Well,
metric,
but what are the
metric that should be used to judge them, et cetera, which is absurd to even ask for.
What are you angry about? I'm just asking you, what are the indices that they use?
Okay, so Judy, he
Well, I told
doesn't
you,
have the answer
I
to your
don't
question.
have the indices, and
You don't know, all right.
you know,
Thank
the
you, Judy,
indices
for
in
that
these
opinion.
cases are inferences drawn from archaeological ruins and such things.
Right, by
Judy's like-
Mr. X, Y, and Z, right?
I just shared an article there by Jared Diamond, who basically said that since agriculture, we've ceased to have egalitarian society. So we have to go pretty far back to regain that.
But that's just not true. In the 17th century in
Well, it's- I
Palmares,
mean,
they
this-
had one.
Okay,
What's
I'm
that?
going to interject right
simply
now.
not the case.
Excuse me. I'm going to interject because what's happening right now is I think we're getting into what's called quibbling and asking for an indice to prove that a society was egalitarian.
Yeah,
Qualifies as a
yeah,
equivalent.
no, it does not.
Why not, Judy?
It qualifies because obviously I want to know what the fuck he's talking about.
Okay, then let's have you read some of his essays. I'll just make an observation.
No, I don't want to read his essays. I've read some of his essays, and there's just too much content. I can't wade through it. I have other
So,
things to
Judy,
read that
okay.
are more important.
Good.
I
thank
want
you.
to. If he doesn't want to give me a direct answer, that's all. So let him just say that he doesn't want to. and but obviously these people have reasons for saying that. They're going to say, well, there was obviously that there was a distribution of the grain, and it was and there's a written evidence that it was handed out equally or something like that. There's got to be some evidence on which they base their conclusion. And if he doesn't know what they are and he's just accepting their word without investigating it, well, I'm sorry, that's
Okay.
not good enough.
Okay, so John, you're not measuring up to Judy's standards for making an argument about what qualifies as egalitarian. So just take that home, chew on it, and come back to us with some indices that demonstrates that you know what an egalitarian society would look like. I'll just make an observation that apparently the Indus Valley is an intriguing one of the centers of civilization, the Mesopotamian, Euphrates, Tigris, the Yangtze river systems in China, the Indus is in Pakistan, which has very much of its history has apparently been washed away. But one of the stories I've heard is that in the Indus Valley, there were no fortresses. And as a measure of an egalitarian society are there fortresses are built for protection. You could still have within a fort an egalitarian society. Judy, I think your question is fine. The indices question is interesting. Challenge to us. Let's come back to that. Mike in Florida.
It's
what are
called
your thoughts?
scientific research.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Mike, what are your thoughts? I know you're driving.
Okay, well, you know, I heard it said that, you know, we must, you know, throw off this tyrannical system that we're enduring. And that is so true. And that's really where our fight is. It's not the implementation of a particular type of government or philosophy or, you know, viewpoint, or whatever you want to call it. But what really is our task is finding harmony with most of society to throw off the tyranny that is hurting most of society. That's the real selling job that we must overcome. It's not trying to sell egalitarianism that is our task. Those merits are self-evident. They'll sell themselves. But I think the word egalitarian is probably the stumbling block that we'll encounter. What we really need to do, though, first is find unity among a cross section of our community, our nation. And tonight at Palm Beach County in Florida, we had a group of citizens that had come together to form a grand jury oversight committee because they feel the court is corrupt, and they're correct. They feel the electoral system in Palm Beach County is corrupt, and they're correct. And the court is corrupt, and they're correct. And what they're trying to do is simply get a grand jury of their peers to examine that evidence. So the tough job is getting a cross section of people from the community that agree with those viewpoints of corruption. And that's a micro example, pardon me, of what we need to do at the national level. But we first must be able to achieve it in a micro fashion at the local level first. If we can't do it there, how in the world are we ever going to be able to do it at a national? So I think getting our ducks in order and the strategy in order is probably the most important thing we can be doing right now. It's without saying that our entire government at all three levels is corrupt. It's captured by ill will intenders, and it must be thrown off. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. the wheel called the Constitution has rolled down the road quite well for its first 100 years. But when money got involved and became entrenched, the power of money and those that hold it, that's when everything changed. In the beginning, we had a pretty good system that flourished and was the spectacle of the world. The world's eyes were upon America for the first 100, 150 years. And they really still are, and they're looking for us to stop the world tyranny, you know, the global tyranny. But it's representation that we need to change, and we need to organize, organize, organize. We've got to build a team to create a machine, because our enemy has a machine and they got teams, and these teams are paid with our tax dollars. They build their machine and keep it maintained with our tax dollars. But time's running out for them. Their method of operation is now well known. They're evil, they're corrupt, but the people are confused as to what to do and how to do it and where to do it. We believe here in Florida, in South Florida in particular, Palm Beach County, we have a trigger and a catalyst that we can use as a weapon in Palm Beach County and expose the severity of the legal system, the judicial system, and the county electoral system. And we hope to be able to spark and ignite that catalyst of corruption to unite people around principle, not partisanship. So I yield.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm gonna flip this over to John Spritzler right now, because and then Judy has her hand up, and there's a question here around this idea of galvanizing the masses to build movement. And John has had an experience as almost anecdotal, meeting with people, and he asked the question, I propose the proposition to remove the rich from power so we can have real and not fake democracy. And in his experience, people affirm that. They say, yeah, well, that's a reasonable thing to do. Let's do that. Now, actually, I don't think your conversation, John, goes into a let's do that. It's an acceptance of the principle. You don't go into this question with people, you know, there's no why we would do this. There's no, because in your experience, and you believe that this is true, that there is already in society a readiness to liberate. The people need to hear a message and know they're not alone in this. Don't take too much time, John, but just give us your perspective on making this appeal to make the better society. You know that I am an advocate for calling out state crimes. I've told you I believe that we can actually build a movement by appealing to people's sense of justice and demand for accountability. But your point is that I have a high bar to reach. In other words, I have to educate people about these crimes, and that's a hurdle. That is a block, conceivably. That you suggested the more easy and accessible approach is to simply make the observation that for whatever reason, this plutocracy should be removed from their positions of power so we can have an egalitarian democratic society. John, just riff on this and give us some thoughts on what you're hearing, and then we're going to go to Judy.
Well, I had some things I wanted to respond to what people said. Should I do that?
Go for it. You've got the floor, John.
Yeah, okay. So let me just say that Mark, you came in late, so you didn't hear the reasons I gave for why the Constitution is bad. You made the point that nothing it says prevents us from doing good things, but the fact is, it says that a few hundred people in Washington, D.C. have the right to be our dictators. That's a bad thing to say, but the Constitution says it. And the Constitution says that the government should be completely open to participation by people who want to have class inequality and oppression, and let that rich, treat the have-nots like dirt. And that's bad. Those are bad things that the Constitution says. So it's not true that it's a neutral document that we can do with whatever we want with. It says that we should not have a government which is really legitimate. It says we should have a government that is not legitimate, and that's bad. So let me just move on now. If we think that we want an egalitarian society, let me point out that people use the word transition. What's the transition to getting an egalitarian society? I would like to point out that if you live in, say, Boston, and you want to transition to being in, say, Beijing, China, the first step is not to book an airplane flight. The first step is not even to call a taxi to take you to the airport. The very, very first step is to say clearly, at least to yourself, I intend to go to Beijing. If you skip that step and only say to yourself and others, well, I sort of want to go somewhere else, maybe east, you're not going to end up in Beijing. God knows where you're going to end up. So let's not talk about transition steps unless we are clear what the first step of a transition is, which is to say to yourself and all the other people you need help to do it, what the goal is explicitly and clearly, because otherwise you're never going to get there. So moving on, the idea that anti-egalitarians should be allowed to participate in the government, which is what the U.S. Constitution says, is a terrible idea. And the people in Missouri right after the Civil War essentially knew that. And they changed the Constitution of the state of Missouri right after the Civil War to exclude from voting or holding public office anybody who supported slavery. The proof of which was to have, fought for the Confederacy. And they were absolutely right. If you want to have a government that opposes oppression, it cannot be a government that allows people who are for oppression to be part of it. If you want to have a fire department that puts out fires, you cannot have a fire department that recruits known arsonists as members. This is common sense. There's a lot of common sense things that we are prohibited from even thinking about because we're ruled by people who are afraid of the have-nots having common sense solutions to their problems. So they fill our heads with a bunch of nonsense. And the US Constitution is one of them. The Fifth Amendment in the Bill of Rights. It says that the government cannot take wealth away from rich people. Like with eminent domain, it has to pay them market price so that they stay just as rich after their land might get used for some other public purpose. So this is to keep the rich rich and the poor poor. That's built right into the Constitution. Okay, the checks and balances that people say is so wonderful in the Constitution. The checks and balances are for the purpose of preventing a small number of rich people or a single rich individual from dominating the other rich. That's what its purpose is. It has nothing whatsoever to do with preventing the rich have-nots from treating, the rich haves from treating the have-nots like dirt, which has been going on ever since the founding fathers. the checks and balance had nothing whatsoever to do with stopping that. So, enough of this celebrating. Well, we've been taught in school to celebrate checks and balances. Rah, rah. Oh, isn't that wonderful? The best thing since sliced bread. It's not. Common sense. Let's use common sense. So let's see. I had some notes here. Give me a second. Oh, people say, well, we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should keep the good principles and theory in the Constitution. I challenge people who say that. Tell me, what is a good principle in the Constitution? What is a good theory? I've enumerated the main principles and theories in the Constitution, and I've talked about how they're bad, not good. So what is the good principle? Some people say, well, the founding fathers, they wanted to have a strong nation, and so that required unity with the slave owners. Bullshit. They could have had unity with the have-nots, with the slaves and the poor whites, who vastly outnumbered the slave owners. They could have had unity with them. No, they chose not to. Common sense. Let's think about things with common sense instead of taking the slogans and the stupid phrases that we've been taught since elementary school. And by the way, the idea that the founding fathers back then didn't know how wrong racist chattel slavery was, how wrong racism was, another bullshit idea. Long before Thomas Jefferson was even born, there was Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 in the colony of Virginia, in which the African and the European descended have-nots united in an uprising that almost overthrew the rich landowners in the colony of Virginia. And in panic, they did something that was brand new to destroy the solidarity between the African and European descended have-nots. They instituted racial discrimination against Black people under the law. But they had to get approval from the mother country in England for their legislation in the Virginia colony, House of Boroughs, I think it was called. So they sent their proposed law to England to get approval, and the high official there, the aristocratic high official, who was the Attorney General, I think was his title, looked at this law to make Black people inferior under the law just because of their Black skin. And he said he was horrified that this was wrong, that this violated all the past British tradition, which was to discriminate against people on the basis of how much property they owned, not the color of their skin. Well, they had to prevail on him to explain that they needed this law to break the solidarity of the have-nots. And eventually they got it, and that's how they got chattel slavery based on race, so that every Black person, even the ones who had some property, were inferior under the law to the poorest white person for the first time, completely violating former British tradition.
John, that qualifies as divide and conquer, right?
Yeah, to destroy solidarity by treating one group, the Blacks, much worse than the whites, and telling the whites it was to benefit the whites and so forth. We've heard all that. White privilege, still used today, same idea. So the idea that the founding fathers didn't know what was wrong with racial discrimination and all that, that's bullshit. Before Thomas Jefferson was born, the Attorney General of England thought it was terrible to discriminate on the basis of skin color. So, we've been taught a lot of bullshit, and we hear it repeated over and over again as if it was wisdom. Let's use our common sense. Now, someone said something about how, well, the egalitarian idea of of sovereign local assemblies using federation was not a good idea because some things can't be done on a large scale that way. That's wrong. The global postal system is based on federation of independent national postal systems. There's no central authority. It is voluntary federation of the postal systems, and the global postal system gets your package delivered just fine. Here's another example of federation working just fine. The National Football League. It has all sorts of football games and leagues and championships and the Rose Bowl, the Super Bowl and all that. Well, there is no central authority that tells the individual teams what they have to do. It's mutual agreements based on voluntary federation of independent football teams. So again, common sense. Let's stop thinking the way the ruling class has worked so hard to make us think with a lot of bullshit ideas to prevent us from talking about what we really want, which is an egalitarian society. And let me now say something about money. Someone said that the problem isn't money, the problem is love of money. Well, love of money is a problem, the root of all evil, so they say. But you know what? The use of money is itself a problem. And here's why. Money, like barter, by the way, money, all forms of money, credit card, paper money, coin money, Bitcoin, I don't care what kind. The purpose of money is for buying and selling things, obviously. And buying and selling things means exchanging equal value for equal value. That's the whole idea of money. Exchange equal value of equal value. But the egalitarian idea rejects that. The egalitarian idea is to share the wealth that we produce according to the principle of from each according to reasonable ability to each according to need or reasonable desire, with scarce things equitably rationed according to need. It's a sharing principle, the way families share the wealth of the family. The parent doesn't say to the child, well, Johnny, you can have dinner tonight if you can afford to pay for it. No. And a society in Spain in 1936 to 9 was based on the sharing principle, from each according to ability to each according to need, not you can only have it if you can afford to buy it. So the idea of money is a way that ruling elites control us, prevent us from creating the kind of society that's truly moral. That's what egalitarian sharing economy is about. Again, there's an element of common sense here. And frankly, when people talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, what I hear is throwing out the common sense baby with the bathwater of ruling class bullshit. And now I'll stop.
All right, good. Thank you, John. Good stopping point. So Judy and then Michael, and we are going to end our recording. We're coming up to the end of the recording, and then we'll hang out and chat. But just for the purposes of producing a recorded event, we are going to end this and wrap this up. So Judy, Michael, and then Mark.
Okay, so I wanted to address this to Mark, and John spoke so long that actually I forgot most of what I was going to say, but at any rate, I will be brief. The Florida anti-corruption meetings, that sounds great, and that's the kind of thing that should be done, people locally taking things into their own hands. Although there may be laws that prevent you from actually from implementing what the changes that you want to make. So I just wanted to say that the Constitution, this Constitution reflected a change from the monarchy system to the rise of the bourgeoisie, in other words, capitalism, and that I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means, but that accounts for the provisions in the Constitution largely. It's to facilitate the smooth functioning of a capitalist system. And as we know from what John posted earlier, the Bill of Rights was actually they had to implement it because of the popular feelings and the possibility of rebellion from an almost successful Shays rebellion and so forth. So they had to appease the common people, but basically, I would not idealize the Constitution, the founding fathers, or anything in that period, because, for one thing, the Constitution, and however well meaning certain founding fathers might have been about certain things, they did not prevent the near extermination of the native population and chattel slavery. So when you idealize the United States, you have to keep in mind that that way long before Israel was committing genocide, the United States was, and other cultures before that. I'm not going to say that America is unique. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Judy. Michael and then Mark. And again, let's be to our point, because we're going to be wrapping up the recording session here.
Yeah, I
Mike,
would have
your
to.
question.
I would have to agree with her comments that we can't idealize American heritage when it comes to our beginnings. Part of it can be, and much of it can't be. And she just gave a prime example. I don't want to be misunderstood that I'm trying to hold up America in an idealistic fashion. I'm holding up components of the system that these men created idealistically. Components, not the entire system. And it's the representation model of that system that is merited. However, it's failed us because of money. Rich plutocracy and oligarchs have captured it and stolen it from us. And John, you said that, we first have to determine what we want. And I think what people want is a virtuous government that they can trust. That's what they want. They know right now what they have is not that in any way, shape, or form. And they know that they have the right to throw it off and to abolish any part of it that's destructive. So if we want to change that, we must figure out how to throw it off first. Once we get it thrown off and we have honest representation, then we can determine what we want. But we first have to throw off what we have. And in order to do that, we've got to design a parallel system and machine. And it's a decentralized county by county, United Counties of America. The system right now is United States of America, and it's centralized and it's captured, and it takes a lot of money to make an influence. But when you divide up that power and decentralize it and turn it into United Counties, where you have 30,000 per representative, you'll then have 11,000 representatives representing each group at 30,000. Your voice will be more, have more volume and be easier to achieve when you have one representative for each 30,000 people. So we first got to figure out how to throw off the tyranny, and it's through decentralization. Then consensus of the governed can be determined by a fair and honest and equitable system of representation. And most people will go for an egalitarian form of government. They've already tasted of plutocracy. They've tasted of the corrupt system of cash and money and corruption. So they know what they need and want. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mark Rollinson.
Excuse me, all right, I'm sorry. Can I speak very briefly after he's finished?
Do you want to respond? Well, you
Okay.
guys. Yes, Mark
No,
Rollinson
I
and-
don't. I don't want to respond. I want to respond to something that was brought up earlier in the meeting.
Okay, hold that thought, Judy. Let's go to Mark Rollinson.
Okay.
Back to you.
I did catch all of John's original presentation and most of Emanuel's. I came in late, but so I don't know what happened from the very start. But anyway, what I wanted to take people to notice here was it was sure the founders were very flawed. They were slave owners, and we can say they were not by any means flawless individuals. But the documents that they produced, the Constitution, I think, was something that a lot of people who fought hard for human rights, further, and I'm speaking specifically of Martin Luther King, deeply valued. And I just found this: Martin Luther King deeply valued the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, viewing them as foundational documents of American democracy. He saw them as great wells of democracy and promissory notes guaranteeing the inalienable rights of all citizens, including African Americans. King's actions and speeches consistently drew upon these documents to call for civil rights and an end to racial injustice, arguing that the promises of the Constitution were not fully being realized by all Americans. And he goes on to talk about the foundation of democracy, promissory notes, challenging injustices and faith in the system. And so I think that the Constitution is something that can be used, like Martin Luther King and others saw it as a document that applied to them, that was not necessarily implemented from the start, to include, the founders, excluded slaves and women and all kinds of people from voting. And so, but I think that as a foundational document, there's nothing in there that talks about dictatorship. It was supposed to be representational democracy, and the people voted, for their representatives. And there's even things about impeachment, and as we all know, the system got corrupted. So, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, I yield.
Thank you, Mark. And let me just make a quick observation. The fact is, the Constitution rationalized slavery by recognizing that one slave is worth whatever it was, 2/3 of a white, right? For counting who electoral college. So just, I mean.
But Chuck, it destroyed slavery as well.
The Constitution destroyed slavery?
It facilitated freedom.
Well, okay, because an amendment, okay, that's fine. Let's not, I catch your drift. It's a living document that had a provision for ending the slavery. I hear what you're saying. Okay, so let's go to Judy. Your thought, Judy?
Yeah, all right. So you were talking about the existence of wealthy people, not just wealthy, but billionaires in an egalitarian society. Now, this is not an example of an egalitarian society, but it is an aspirational egalitarian society. That is, it was conceived originally as being able to lead to an egalitarian society, which is the Chinese communist system. So they reverted back to capitalism in the I think in the 70s, was it? And now they're trying to change course again. I don't know how serious they are, but at any rate, so there are many billionaires in China. And the thing about billionaires is they tend to try to rule the country. So what the Chinese Communist Party has done is it has a law, uh, uh, I forget exactly what it's called, something like common prosperity or common interest, that every business and every individual has to conduct themselves in a way that leads to the common interest, the interests of the whole society. So, in other words, if a guy has a business that's polluting, he is by law constrained from continuing to pollute because it violates the common interest. And they have been known to execute wealthy people and to put them in jail, although they're not that strict about it, but they do it. So that's an example of a strange coexistence, which, in my opinion, can't last. But all right, I wonder what you think of that.
Are you asking John Spritzler to respond to your thought, Judy?
No, anybody.
Okay. So we're wrapping up the recorded portion of our evening, and we can hang out and chat afterwards. But I just want to kind of let's close our meeting with some thoughtful reflection. I can't say that we have a consensus here necessarily on how to. Well, I think where we have a consensus is Catherine Austin Fitts says there is a real serious problem with plutocracy and the power that's accumulating and aggregating to the elite. And David Hughes, I think, has probably a fine analysis, class-based, that the plutocrats have developed into a transnational globalist program, and they are advancing a digital system to kind of track and trace everyone and do their thing to be in control. Catherine Austin Fitts says we have to decentralize if we want to be free. And I think we should kind of probably leave our evening with Catherine Austin Fitts' call, because I think there is a consensus on that. Now, we can have debate and discussion around how we get there, but the bottom line is the Green Party subscribes to a grassroots democracy. Ralph Nader speaks to the value of putting ordinary people together into a room, posing a problem, letting them talk together about that problem, and I'm not going to say invariably, but high probability they're going to come up with a pretty good darn answer and solutions. And given the innate sense of fairness most people have, the solution would be, generally speaking, a fair one. So, maybe we leave it at that in terms of our recording for this evening, unless someone has a strong feeling of something we should add to our recording to end our discussion on making appeals to the Constitution for the purpose of advancing the better society. Anything else that we could close out with that someone feels urgently we should add? Once, twice, thrice, sold
Hang on, I'll add one thing. I think
Yes.
that just to note that in the preamble, I think it says right there, one of the goals is to promote the general welfare, and that means that the goals of the Constitution were to promote the general welfare of the people. And so,
So what
in order to have so you can say that the Constitution was basically, written with an sort of egalitarianism in mind, even.
Mark, I agree with you. And I really like the preamble. The function of our government is to look out for the general welfare. And arguably, the ruling elite have failed miserably to fulfill that constitutional duty. And as far as I'm concerned, that gives us solid standing as egalitarians to call them out on that. I'll just observe that Judy has posted in the chat that in her opinion, Catherine Austin Fitts commits fear porn. Well, a lot of people commit fear porn, but that doesn't detract from the virtue of a decentralized society that's democratic and people have agency. Right now, we're struggling against a society that's dominated and is taking away agency. We don't have democratic destiny. We are, I think, falling into a...
Well, what you have a decentralized society. What are you going to do when Saudi Arabia sends 50,000 top fury terrorists over?
I'm going to take my carbine out and shoot them when they come to my door. I'm going to join up with my buddies. We're going to fight back against them. What are you going to do, Judy?
I am not planning on having a decentralized system.
Okay, well
So
then I think let's just, for the record, let's be clear. You don't have any confidence of any of the ideas presented in this evening, I gather.
Hey,
I missed the first half hour.
Oh, darn it. You always do that. You should come earlier.
I know that.
I got to interject here. The decentralization is only in the representation model aspect. The actual government would be a nationwide government that could defend itself and raise an army. So don't think that.
So are you saying there are no national representatives?
No, there would be. But it needs to be the representation to acquire the representatives, to select the representatives must be decentralized. So there's an equitable manner of selection. Right now, it's those with the most money, the capitalists. They govern us. Right. They rule us.
Okay.
Right. Well, what about getting rid of the capitalists?
Well, how do you get rid of someone?
You would get rid of them by passing laws that give a death sentence to a corporation. That's the way it used to be many years ago.
No, you will never pass those laws because you're not in a position to pass them. It's only people that are being bribed by the plutocrats that are in the position.
Right, because it's a centralized system. It's a centralized system. That's why.
All right. So the first thing that has to be done, and it was done in 1917 and in 1949. At other times is to seize for the people, or the so-called the party of the people, whomever that might be, to seize the means of production from the capitalists and run it for the benefit of the entire society. And that's the only way of achieving equality.
And to do that, you need to have power and control over those who make the laws. and you can't just
No, to
immediately do it.
no, you don't know. No, the whole system is thrown out, including this bourgeois benefiting constitution.
Yeah, and
which
how are you
People have
going to
a
do that?
hard time of letting go of the things they are comfortable and familiar with.
I just muted Judy. There's talking over right now. So,
Yeah, I was talking and somebody interrupted. I just want to say that that there are many. I disagree with John that despite the fact that it's a rich man's document, there are many provisions in it that benefit us, and we're lucky, to have it. And we should take advantage of whatever it is that we can use to our interest, not give it up. And what I really wanted to say was Trump is destroying everything, and it's driving me crazy. He wants to take over the Library of Congress now. He's
hey,
he's taking
Judy,
what?
let's save
Well,
the
Congress has
discussion of
advocated
Trump
for
afterwards,
responsibility.
please. Let's focus. Let's just wrap this up and end the recording, and we can hang out and chat about
All
the
right. Okay.
Is there other final? So, Mike, thank you for your thoughts. Tom Rodman, you have your hand up. Is this? We're trying to close our recorded session. We've really dived in quite deep. I think
it's kind of general comment. I there's somebody that I'm not gonna mention his name, but I was in a Zoom today and he reviewed World War I and World War II, and it was pretty bizarre. But the idea being that Germany in both cases was baited into the war, and I know that sounds nuts, but he went through detailed analysis. And my takeaway after his about 20 minutes was just this idea that, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that maybe there is this hegemonic tendency to want to just dominate the world, and I guess the gravity of our current situation, we're just being attacked. There's so many different vectors. I think we again, the engineering detailed oriented part of me is like, let's act, and I agree with Mike that from Florida that incremental steps is what we need to do. Well, and that, don't throw the baby out. The Constitution, it's about 7,600 words, and with the amendments. And so let's tear it down and build it back up. That's fine. And don't necessarily have a convention, but this sense though that, it's not federation that's happening. It's like another way to look at globalism is that this whole one world government thing, which sounds like a right-wing conspiracy theory. Maybe there's something to it. So, okay,
so.
pass.
I think we're going to give Tom Rodman the last word on our recorded session, and we're going to talk afterwards. I'm going to end the recording. I think this was a good conversation to have, and I think we should continue these kinds of focused, directed questioning about how we get from here to there. And that's, and we have opportunities to do more of these. I think this was useful, and we start to reveal kind of where we fall in our confidence or lack of confidence on any possibility for anything to be different. So this has been a Green Renaissance meetup. I'm Chuck Fall with the Green Liberty Caucus, and I appreciate everyone being here and participating. John Spritzler and Emanuel, especially for kind of leading with their essays and their thoughts. So we're going to end our recording and we'll talk a little bit further.